Welcome to Expedition Self on Om Times Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parado. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parado.
Well, good evening. I am live this evening on Expedition Self. I'm Sam Parado, and I'm glad you've decided to drop by because tonight's show it's a heavy show. I should just pre-warn you. So if you're not wanting a show that's going to ask you to do a lot of thinking, you might want to listen to this another time. It's probably not such great marketing, but it's the truth. And but it's what causes people to be humanityless and to become or to be empty-hearted. And so I do want to say, if you we're going to be talking about it in such a way that I'm actually looking for you to engage your mind. So it's really going to be less of a what am I bringing and more about how you allow yourself to step into the conversation. You know, I was supposed to do this show last week, and then my Wi-Fi just went down hours before it was aired, probably a little synchronicity, because it was kind of a blessing for me because it gave me some more time, to think about exactly what I wanted to talk about. So if you'd like to call in this evening, and for those who don't know, I'm live on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. when my schedule allows it, and the number to call in is 202-570-7057. All right, let's see. Okay, so I just want to say I would describe myself as kind of a sociology hobbyist. and because of this, I have pondered some pretty deep questions from the time I was a very little girl. And tonight's topic is one of those that's always left me wondering, how do people get to a place where they're empty-hearted? And to put it in everyday terms, where they're mean, where they're cold, where they have no empathy, right? Where they appear to be filled up with hate, and where they are cold unto themselves. And what went along with those thoughts from the time I was a little girl is, how they can't see their actions clearly, nor do they appear to see others with empathy. I could have done this show probably at any time over the last years, and it would have still been relevant. And for many people who live in the world, I think they deal with this kind of void in the people around them frequently, even as they go about their daily lives. But I guess it came at this moment, one where I was ready to be on air and to be okay with hovering in how much doesn't quite come together about it, or you can't explain it. And even if you can explain it, you're still left with the reality of what we're all dealing with. So I'm definitely going to talk about the empty-hearted person tonight and what that's all about from the way I think about it. But I'm pretty sure when we get done, we will all still sit inside of our own thoughts, recognizing how much is left to still understand. And what I do hope you do is that you bring it back inside of yourself, and you see if you can find places that, though they are not as extreme, that you find your own cold spaces. And I also hope you can connect with the idea that if we are all connected, if we are one humanity, if there's a part of you that believes that, or wants to believe it, then anything we can do to tend to and heal this coldness in our own hearts must be helpful, right? And necessary, really, if we're going to find our way out of this mess that we're in and have been, right, for a very long time. It's just so very present. So, the first thing I want to address is this sense that globally we are in a battle for a democratic, humanistic world. And that right now there seem to be huge power players trying to assert something that very much resembles autocratic, authoritarian environments where people from any walk of life are not related to as having value. And again, I'm not really going to, this is not a political conversation tonight, but I need to address this piece. I attribute this entire polarity, this entire conflict, to the very human experience that's wrapped in a package that looks very much like power and powerlessness. And certainly it's at play, right? But if I look further into this, I find an entire conversation about economics, the economics that produce poverty, of being able to afford to live in physically safe geographies, the economics of having enough to survive. And so we can understand that where someone is unable to survive, they are going to have some kind of a reaction as they make their way through a lifetime resulting from this extreme lack. So we're talking about a question of degree. And I would say that every single decimal place matters in the context of degree. Just in this moment, think about the lack you might have grown up inside of. So there was a 6-month period when I was on the school lunch program and we had eggs, potatoes, bread, butter, and hunted meat to eat for dinner and breakfast. That felt like lack. During that time, I didn't feel physically safe in two ways. One, it had to do with my stepfather and how he treated me. And the other way was at school among classmates who saw me as someone to beat up. So there was a lack right on that level too. And so I see these kinds of experience in life as deprivation in some way. The thing about my lack is that it wasn't so pervasive that other more abundant and possibility-laden experiences, they did find their way into my life. I was very much loved by my mother and my grandmother, and I knew it. I also, I had teachers who treated me with respect. They cared about my viewpoint. They were kind to me. And I had the experience of getting to go to school and participate in school stuff that I was interested in. I also, at the time, I felt like I had adequate inner talents and skills. So this caused me to walk through life believing, whether rightly or wrongly, like I could some way or another get where I was going, and that I had reason to believe that things could get better, and so I had hope. So I'd like you to stop for just a moment. And if you've been following along with my story, and then you think about your lack and your deprivation and your not having enough, right? That's the whole point of this show tonight, is to really see if you can allow yourself a reflective time to really get connected to these elements that are at play inside of empty hearts. So I've just described some very basic kinds of needs. The need to be physically safe, the need to have enough food and water, and the need to have people who made me feel loved and wanted. So how do these memories play for you? And when you think about these memories, can you feel any coldness creep up the inside walls of your rib cage and your spine and the bottoms of your feet? This coldness, can you get in touch with it within yourself right now as I speak about it? And the only way to do this is to get out of your head and actually try to feel what I'm describing right now. See if you can feel the inside places that connect with lack. So if we're going to talk about what it means to be empty-hearted, I think we have to start here. And the idea of starting here is really a way to say we didn't start out empty-hearted, or at least I believe it's not likely that we started out empty-hearted. And when I say this, I believe a brand new baby can actually feel this coldness, right, in the womb. So it's not like they acquire coldness after they're old enough to speak words or understand, right? And I say this because first and foremost, we're 100% sensory beings. We feel, we smell, we hear, we process through all those, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of nerve endings we've got. I can always forget the number. And if we are that, well, then feeling as if our most basic of needs won't be met is something that is so very crucial and essential to our sense of feeling. So if our need is not met, then it would send a direct hit, I'm saying, to the heart. So I can imagine for people who have lived in extreme poverty, generation after generation, that the coldness would be kind of like a legacy, an expected norm that gets explained and worked with in a particular way. Now, I want to say in this moment, I'm really in this conversation to prompt thought, not because I think I know or I'm right about all this, but these are my meanderings. These are the things I have explored as I've met people along my journey in life. And I noticed when I have spent time with people who have lived in extreme lack, they sort of just, many of them just lowered their effort. And then they accepted what was so. And certainly not all. So I don't usually do shows that are so focused on just this true void or depleted kind of space. But at this time, I think we must put ourselves inside of it rather than observing it through opinion and assessment and data. Right? We've got to make sure we are one with what's happening in our world. I think we have to truly tour the bowels of the worst of humanness. And I have to say, I'm sure, right, and I had a brief stint of this, just a little bit, is that being poor takes a huge toll on the mind, the body, and certainly the heart. Certainly the heart. So I'm saying that when people live in extreme lack, it seems like their expectations just sort of become lessened, right? It makes so much sense. But that's not all that happens. I mean, I like to think, now get ready because I'm going to throw in one of my famous metaphors that makes very little sense. But I like to think of it as each person being like a bucket filled with marbles, mozzarella balls, and mashed potatoes. Okay, so they have a mind that's working to make sense of things. And those are the marbles, right? Going around and around and around. And then they have a bunch of feelings that have to be, right, they're soft, but they can be squished and torn apart. Those are the mozzarella balls. And then there's the mashed potatoes. And that's this sensory experience of being in our bodies, right? It's everywhere. It makes contact with all parts of what makes us us. And it's the feeling of the air against our skin, the bottoms of our feet as we walk across the floor, the pangs of hunger. All right. So I'm going to talk a lot about marbles and mozzarella balls and mashed potatoes inside of this core place of lack, as a way to talk through what brings us to a place where we lose our humanity, or where our humanity may be missing. All right? We'll dive into marbles, mozzarella balls, and mashed potatoes when we return from break.
Conscious media for conscious minds. Om Times. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of Om Times Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of Om Times. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
You came across someone struggling with hunger. How would you recognize them? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for summer break
because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet?
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Sam Parado. You're listening to Expedition Self, and tonight we're talking about what makes someone empty-hearted. And at break, there is a commercial about people being hungry. And boy, it really fits into what we're talking about, because we're saying when people are hungry, something happens inside of themselves. So this idea of empty-hearted is that really where I'm saying is that the more people live in lack, the more the mashed potatoes are eroded to almost nothing, right? That we lose the ability to sense or taste or truly register what the body is experiencing, because we have to insulate ourselves. We have to become defensive. We have to thicken up, right? And then in the thickening, we lose it. And of course, the more we have people have no ability to process emotions. And of course, how many emotions are there? Hundreds, right? Leaving, the symbol of these mozzarella balls basically disintegrated or decaying rather than able to be processed. Well, then the mind is left with nothing but cold glass and a series of thoughts or ideas that are, crazily, right, trying to make sense or rationalize or justify or explain why there's nothing there for it, because the mind is always faced with providing explanation, rationalize, like making sense of what doesn't make sense. So if we are to reverse this set of ingredients that I'm trying to describe as having a huge impact on how it goes for a person, then it means that one mozzarella ball that could get processed could change the way that person operates in the world, or the trajectory, ooh, I can't get that word out, of their life. And that the marble, that maybe even it's the color of the marble, right? If we were going to choose one, goes from a just plain green one to one that now has blue and green in it. Or any ability to actually recognize that there's a sensation that's appealing or pleasurable, as we were depicting in the mashed potatoes, then that will produce a shift in what that person is willing to desire or how they want. And this is just a little non sequitur, but you can see this in the idea that someone who experiences pleasure out of a big space of lack through drugs, right, could want to keep taking them as a way of, trying to consume mozzarella balls when the mashed potatoes are just too painful, or they're too disconnected from that aspect of the self to make a difference. So I sit and ponder, how does someone become so heartless they can physically hurt another person? And the first thing my mind does is remind me that I am a product of the same kind of combination of marbles, mozzarella balls, and mashed potatoes. So it's likely that I've been cold and that I haven't cared about someone else's experience and have then added to the squished and disintegrated mozzarella balls inside of them, and that I probably helped to solidify and harden marbles in their collection that now have more reason to explain why some inner part of themselves just took a hit. None of us get off here. Really, I just want to say this. As much as we would like to look at ourselves through this lens of being a good person, we're human beings, and human beings are really this set of needs and this core space where our soul exists, and then we're trying to learn about life and the universe and how to operate in it in a way that produces beautiful and wonderful things. So it's like this contraption that has mashed potatoes and mozzarella balls on the inside of it, and these have everything to do with the marbles that make the brain function, that occupy themselves in the brain, right? These marbles that go around and around and are hard and unbreakable. This is a good time to call in if you're connecting with this conversation, right? I'm going to give the phone number just in this moment, 202-570-7057. So it's these marbles that so many people, they get very attached to how true they are and how right they are. And these marbles are really, all they were trying to do was explain these extreme experiences that produce lack. And so this is where I stop a lot, just to keep thinking on it and keep processing it and keep trying to get underneath, is the heart isn't accessible really through the mind, not without some kind of instigation or catalyst. It's really only accessible when it loves something or someone, or it is loved by something or someone, or it registers any version of all of love. So there is this something about we human beings, right, that we're social. And so no matter how much we live in lack, if there's someone there who we feel connected to, like we can belong with, then there's a way that the heart will attach itself. Because I think belonging is everything to human beings. It's just everything. It is a place where love comes through it. Like, I want you with me. You matter to me. Your existence matters. If you look through your childhood and that of your children's, right? Or of your, your family, when belonging is present or missing, the picture of their lifetime is reflective of this. And of course, this is where I get a bit in a pretzel twist. Because with all that mashed potato and the mozzarella balls being smushed and crushed because of the core level of survival, right? Which really, at some level, everybody is dealing with some form of lack and deprivation. Of course, tonight we're talking about extreme levels of that. Belonging becomes a way to gain some sense of this emotional sensory connection again. And this is where I think we can be manipulated, because if my sense of belonging can fill the void that lives inside of me of those missing mozzarella balls and the rancid mashed potatoes, I'll take any marbles on that go along with me belonging. So remember, the job of the mind is to explain things. It's designed. It's very designed. It's like a computer. I mean, that's how computers got created, is because of the mind, right? It's to process information, to put it in neat categories and boxes. And so someone comes along, or some family or some community comes along and offers belonging to the places in ourselves where we've experienced this lack or void or emptiness or deprivation. And then they say, and by the way, here's all the marbles to go with it. It's going to get a lot of mileage. It's going to get a lot of mileage. You see, we human beings, we're really fragile. We're so fragile. We are feeling beings, and we spend all of our time like denying it. So there's two directions I'd like to go here. One is the person that never feels like they belong. So they and maybe they even reject it, right? Their way of defending from the inside is to actually block ever belonging. So they don't get to fill that big gaping hole inside of themselves with anything. And so to me, they're going to manufacture their own marbles. And wherever I have been defensive or self-protected, which I think has been a huge part of my own life, I came up with my own story of belonging, which basically explained wherever it was why I didn't. And I think this goes on for that in people. Wherever they can't find a place to belong, they come up with their own story about it. Right? And then the other person, which is the person that finds a way to belong by being taken in, right, by some set of ideas that create inclusion. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that if we don't start out empty-hearted and lack and the sense of having no a lessening relationship with our sensory emotional being, that what can actually happen is a question of degrees. Our hearts can become less and less accessible, less and less available to even know they exist, and ultimately it gets emptier and emptier. I remember a long time ago, I was working with a therapist, and she was a healer, and she had kind of a whole program, and I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot with her. But one day I was talking about feeling like I didn't have a place where I belonged, and she said to me, "Oh, well, you can come be part of my community." And I got to tell you, the melting that went on inside of me, like the desire to jump so fast, right? It was like so very, very present for me. As it went, I did engage for a while, but after participating in that community, I ended up not finding it to be where I wanted to stay, like as a lot, and so I moved on to something else that felt more aligned with my path. And so it was a good experience, and it was a community that I saw completely fill the void for others. And I don't know about you, but I would ask you in this moment to think about the communities you occupy for whatever the thing is that brings you to them. And think about what they fill in you and why you chose them or why you have gone towards them or left them. This is important if we're going to understand ourselves as human beings inside of some of the things that we're experiencing right now in our lives, in our world. So let me get back to empty-hearted. So empty-hearted is seeded through deprivation, the deprivation of basic fundamental needs like food, water, and shelter, and by the deprivation of love. And the more this deprivation happens, and the more violent the experience of living is, the more the mashed potatoes, the sensory experience, and the mozzarella balls, the emotional experience, will produce marbles that will effectively explain it away or make sense of it by determining how right it is or how wrong it is. And so it's at this point that these marbles just start to reinforce their own hardening. And what I've noticed is that blame, I'm such a victim of the world, finger pointing, and ideological hatred can become very embedded in people's belief systems. Right now, remember, belief systems are created also to keep us safe. So there's always this kind of, what do I want to say, like an interconnected joint, like between the two, where that we're safe in this idea that we see it and we're right about it and we reinforce it. But there's also what we're not recognizing is going on is that our inner world is latching onto a set of ideas so that we don't have to live in this unknown and all this confusion and all this fragility, right? And all this core, really, vulnerability. So can you see that the further we get away from actually feeling, and of course, the more we felt that was awful to experience, we don't want to feel. And the more we don't want to feel, the more the marble bowl gets filled and refilled. It gets refilled because it collects more data, right? Collects more stories, collects more moments to say, oh, there it is again. And so the more the resulting ideas fill the marble bowl, the more they get proven to be true. Now, I'm creating like a chain link here in this conversation. So once these marbles multiply, the mozzarella balls, the emotional experience, and the mashed potatoes, the sensory, which are now rancid inside the self, well, they are now fueling the energy that keeps those marbles moving around and rolling around. It gives the mozzarella balls and the mashed potatoes an outlet, but it's not a clear outlet. It's not one that actually had the heart open, right? The heart gets to stay closed and then move through all these ideas, all this thought. This is really rough because those mozzarella balls and the mashed potatoes, they always needed an outlet, but not through the hardness of marbleized ideas. And if somebody is living inside of so much lack, who has time for feelings? Who has the ability to take away being cold? or being hungry. So you can see why it happens. So I'd like to work this just a bit in reverse, like from our self-development model of going inside. We start out a lot of the time talking to people about their own rhetoric and their belief systems and, the way they relate to their emotions and how rigid they are in assessing right and wrong and judging. All of that is the byproduct of these marbles that have been doing their job, right? Being generated by unworked sensory and emotional material. So if anybody is in an extreme circumstance where they are in danger, where they're starving, where they're at risk physically, with no explanation for their pain and suffering, I guess I'm saying I believe that they and we will deal with this extreme level of disconnect from their sensory emotional selves such that they will become cold and heartless. That they will become cold and heartless. And I keep saying they, but there's always a we in here. But we're trying to talk about it in extreme terms tonight. And that's why I want to just keep pushing us to get in the full continuum of a little to a lot. All right, when I come back, more on cold and heartless.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
All right, we are back. I'm Sam Parado, and you're listening to Expedition Self. Tonight we're talking about pretty serious stuff and, in the context of what does it mean to be empty-hearted, and how do we get there? How do we help to heal this in the world? I think as I'm going through tonight's conversation, it was just important to me to talk about it. And hopefully it's helping you to just ponder your own thoughts, that even if they're very different than mine, but it helps us get in touch with, we must stay close. We must stay close to the human experience that's underneath everything that we're living through. Okay, so the more people feel cold and heartless, the more they're going to seek an explanation for this. And when this explanation helps them belong to something, well, then they have an outlet now for their moldy and overaged, disintegrated into mush, core emotional sensory experience of being a person who can live and love. I can see that it's hard to come back into the world of being of heart en masse from that. And, over the last week, the thing I kept thinking over and over, and it has been present for me every time I read a very personal retelling of someone in a war story, is how can they look in another person's eyes and take action, right? That's hurtful. How can they see another human being and not realize the cost of harming them or taking their life? And if they are doing it repeatedly, how does the heart ever come back from that? I mean, think about it. For one person, the act of this hatred, this outlet, right, of a self-denied, denied and deprived, that the act of hatred may be a release of their own. But for another person who is cold and detached, in order to find their own heart again, they would have to see the eyes of the person or persons that they harmed. So the heart is registering everything, whether the person is or not. I'm so convinced of this, and we're so very dependent of feeling. We're dependent on feeling and being loved. And so with the basic fundamental needs often not met, is only the sense of love and being loved that offers any salvation from having a cold and empty heart, I think. Right? When someone has one person amidst a world of lack who offers some sensation of love, and that person is lost, they can become empty-hearted dealing just with the grief. I've heard so many stories about someone in this circumstance, and it brings me to one of the most important points of tonight's talk, is working with the emotions to learn how to process them in a healthy way is probably the single most important set of skills we can hone within ourselves and offer to our children and our family members. These mozzarella balls have to learn how to be savored and worked with if we are to find a way to embrace all people. So back to this empty-hearted. I have been empty-hearted, but my form of empty-hearted, right, has been tempered by having an opportunity to belong and by being loved and by loving. So my empty-hearted experience shows up, right? If we're always talking about this question of degree in terms of even decimal points, mine shows up more around specific moments when it's life happening. You know, standing in the line at the grocery store and getting impatient, driving down the highway, someone cuts me off and then flips me off, you know, trying to get to the Department of Motor Vehicles to approve something I've submitted 4 times, right? Or speaking to an IRS agent. Like, it also can show up in my work if it feels like, you know, someone's working against me or standing in the way of my agenda. And I think this is what I wanted to get to in this show. It is a question of degree, but I don't think any of us escape some degree of empty-heartedness. Our harm to others may not be lethal, but it very well is emotional, and it very well may cause marbles to get born, right? And to get harsher and harder, defenses to firm up. I said this earlier in the show, I hear so many stories. There isn't a day go by when someone tells me about a friend who wasn't a good friend, or a marital partner who had an affair, or an employee who acted out of integrity, or a boss who flagrantly embarrassed someone who worked for them in front of their coworkers. Our hearts are the point. Our lack of learning how to manage the feeling of those darn mozzarella balls will most assuredly have an impact on our ideology. And boy, do we believe our ideology, right? Because no matter what side of it, of anything you stand on, no matter what side, it's still rigid. It's still an ideology, and it's still a byproduct of what you have or haven't dealt with in your heart. I get frustrated with opinions sometimes, right? Because if we want to accept that we are one with all people, and I do mean all. We have a task to do right now, and that is to recognize that those marbles make us cold and hard somewhere, sometime, with someone. So I guess this is why I always question how someone can be so empty-hearted that they can intentionally do harm. Because most of the examples I speak about above are unintentional, right? They're like more a byproduct of unconsciousness. But the empty-heartedness that's fueled by revenge and retribution and hate and resentment, where there's an intentional target for all of this, you have to ask, how do they go inside? How does it break up for them? And it's one thing to understand that we are all one, and there's more inside for each of us that's unconscious to reveal. It's quite another thing to think about those mashed potatoes turned to deadness and the mozzarella balls turned to hate and disgust and contempt, that then find their way to marbles filled with data and manifestos and overactive strategies and a place to belong with all that. Right? And they found a way to distort the real pain of their life and give it a pathway out, directed somewhere else rather than be able to sit with it. The sitting in our own pain. Is it too much to ask? Is it too much to ask? Are we so fragile that we find it impossible to feel all of that stuff inside of ourselves? Is it only for the privileged whose basic needs are met, so they have the bandwidth? And so this brings me around to another circle of thought, is what is our responsibility to the whole of humanity to work on ourselves and to find the empty-hearted spaces in ourselves? Again, question of degree here. And is the pursuit of consciousness and accountability for those who are able to make time and space to pay attention? I as I was thinking about this, really where I land, and it's always is a heart melter for me, is when someone is kind. And so is kindness like a bridge, right? That it touches our hearts when we might be empty to another person's experience. So when I use these words empty-hearted, I'm thinking of a space that is not empty, but actually buried, not accessible, disconnected from. And it's filled with remnants of so many mozzarella balls from so many emotional moments left unattended that they've just globbed together, petrified, and become rock-like themselves and stone cold or hot, depending upon the person's method of being in their own skin. How do we crack it? How do we crack it when there are people in the world who are dealing with the lack of basic needs for survival, but you maybe are not, or I am not? So I talk a lot about the 5 core needs of being human, and these are safety, lovable, valuable, worthy, and accepted. And all of these actually lead to a sense of belonging. Well, you and I and everyone else have likely taken on damage even to these core needs, even if your basic needs were met. Your sensory and emotional inner self is awaiting more of your attention. So on going inside, which is my favorite subject, this is the thing. It's not just about telling the story or talking about it. The only way to decalcify emotion is to be open to feeling them. The only way to begin the reduction of the heart fill is to seek out sensory experience and pay attention. And for the marbles, this is a big one, right? To begin to challenge our conclusions about everything. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake. The earth is at stake, people around the world at stake, your family is at stake, your future grandchildren or nephews or nieces or friends' children. So you want to notice the rigidity and the hardness, the detachment, the way you agree and feel right with your ideas. And you want to watch how easily you throw your opinions around and don't even think about who's listening and how their experience may not be represented in what you've spouted. And you want to engage in real conversation with people who don't see the world the way you do, and find an emotional place where kindness can exist. You want to get straight about how much your marbles have decided they're smart, and being smart matters, and this makes your marbles possibly superior to someone else's, which means you can remain detached. You want to redirect your mind towards questioning what there is to see and learn about yourself rather than working off of the already chewed up emotional material as if it is done and in the past. Because it's not. It's not. If you've got hardened marbles, it's not done. One more thing is to recognize that you're learning about how to process emotion. You're learning about how to process it. It's never done. And there are certain emotions and sensory experiences that you, uniquely you, because of all the stuff that's happened in your life, you are always trying to avoid. And that, coupled with the idea that you can never, and I mean never, really truly know someone else's experience of being in their own skin, right? The learning, wanting to learn, wanting to grow, wanting to challenge, wanting to see things different, wanting to push those edges. That matters. All right. So throughout this whole evening, I haven't really mentioned how violence makes the entire conversation ratchet itself up, but it does, obviously, right? Don't you think it does? Because violence is not only about harm, it's about this idea of damage done to someone's inalienable birthright, soul right to occupy their place on the land and on the earth. I kind of think that the more someone feels deprived, the more violent they might be. The more those distorted emotions turned into cold ideas and then very hot, inflamed, incendiary actions. It is overwhelming to me to think about the degree to which we all need to heal, both for ourselves and those closest to us. The healing that is needed for people who live across town and across the world knows no bounds. So I just hope tonight you've had a chance to sit and think about how you can make a difference just in your own willingness to face yourself. And I want to encourage you to take those risks to learn how to process your emotions and stand for the same for every person in your immediate circle. To inspire you, as I would be great, to challenge your ideology and question your own rhetoric, and then help others question theirs. And as we go through this time, I would like to encourage you that we are all one, all of us. And as long as one person, one group, one community is suffering, then somewhere we are all feeling this too. I had a poem for this evening, but I don't think I'm actually going to have time. And I'm not even sure it's actually a poem, but it's a statement by Esther Perel. And so I'm going to post it on the samparato.com website so that you can see it. And you'll recognize it because it starts out with, "Be careful to separate people from the policies of their government." And so it actually goes on from there, right? Be careful to separate people from the actions of terrorists who live among them. And there's a whole slew of secondary comments. So I'm going to post this on the website. And I want to say thank you for staying tuned to this show and for being with me as I work to process through what it's like to be a human being right now. Thank you. Have a wonderful week.